Hello and welcome everybody out there in Union Arena land. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today. Before we jump in to our newest Through the Gauntlet, how about we have the two players here shout themselves out? And if you're associated with an org, go ahead and shout them out as well. Let's start with you, Hyperactive.
Hey, you can call me Hyperactive Gremlin. I play a lot of JJK, big fan of the series, and I've been playing UA for a little bit over, I'd say 4 months now.
Mm, yes, and he's been the pioneer of the Megami deck in the Rumble Rama community, where you were most noted by. I'm finding out more content creators. I was actually talking to Xander Rogue the other day, and yeah, he's like, "Oh, he's the Megami guy." I'm like, "Yep, that's him." And then, of course, we have our other guest, Izarzin. Shout yourself and your org out.
Yeah, what's up, guys? It's Izarzin, and I'm part of the Big Beard Pirates TCG, three-piece TCG, and we do Union Arena content, One Piece content, basically anything Bandai. And I'm coming here with the SAO.
Yes. Now, before we get into everything that we're going to be doing, how about we start with a few preliminary questions, since we didn't get this out of the way with you previously, Hyperactive, when you were playing against me. So let's learn a little basis of your two decks that you're piloting, shall we? So you were playing Sukuna, which is Blue JJK and JJK's best deck in NA right now. Some people are believing that it's still tier one. Some people are of the opinion that it's moved down to tier two. Regardless, the deck is still very much clearly a threat against anybody you're playing against. So, what role do you see Sukuna playing in the current meta? Is it more of a reactive control deck, a tempo heavy mid range threat? And how do you assess when you are going to be that type of deck?
I would say its role in the current meta is very similar to what Gios was last meta, being it is a gatekeeping tool. And what I mean by a gatekeeping tool is there is a steep drop off in tier 2 to tier 3, I feel right now, because most tier 2 decks can deal with a high roll JJK. And if you can't, you are relegated to bottom of tier 3 basically immediately. But the reason why it's not hard meta anymore and more of a gatekeeping tool is because it has a hard time against the tools the new decks are bringing out. In OPM, JJK was still the best deck, but it was certainly brought down a peg by the existence of the 10Ks and basically all of the rush decks that it couldn't keep up with. And now, with the coming of SAO, there's a lot of snipe, and JJK also has a hard time dealing with it. While I do think that it is tier 1 still, I believe that the best deck now falls to either Code Geass or probably some OPM. But JJK definitely still tier 1.
All right. So, what are the key goals you're looking to hit by turn 3 or 4 to feel like the Sukuna deck is really online? What is the ideal situation you want to be looking at for anybody who might be a new player trying to play the deck?
For anyone who might want to see how they gauge their board, I would say a optimal goal to hit by turn 3 would be at least one raid. Now, if you want, the optimal thing would be two raids by turn 3. And how to get there is, I would say, if you have a hand that can play a 2 cost on turn 2, I would keep it, because that means it's pretty much always going to be a Maki, but in the pure version it could be a Gojo. And in both of those scenarios, the next plays will be a lot easier. If you could play 2 cost on turn 2, you might even have a domain if you're going second, then that'll get the raid out early. But if you can't play a 2 cost on turn 2 and instead you have to manage your hand with a bunch of zeros, I wouldn't keep it, because this deck is very, very good at snowballing. So even if you don't have any plays maybe for one turn, the next turn you could just go explosive anyways.
So, when you're piloting Sukuna, what kind of hands make you feel confident going into a blind matchup? Is it a 3 zeros, a 2 0, and a 2, or Maybe a 1-0 and 4 fours.
Into a blind matchup, I would focus on establishing your game plan because most decks in this game, you honestly don't care about what they do. You just need to do what you want faster. So I would prioritize the 2 1s and a 2 or 3 1s. Generally the same basis of you want to play a 2 cost on turn 2.
Okay, so do you tend to play Sukuna decks more aggressively or hold your threats until you see a clear line to punish and outtempo the opponent?
With the Sukuna version that I'm playing, it's a bit weird. For something like pure Sukuna, you would want to go hard aggro. You would want to keep pressure. You would want to keep the enemy on the back foot. But with Nanami and the more tempo gameplay, you would want to hold a few of your tools just in case they have something to rebound. And what I mean by this is the only thing you want to play proactively is your Sukunas and maybe your Nanamis if you know they don't have a way to deal with Sukuna at the moment. And what you want to do is you want to wait for them to rebound after your initial push and then just pressure over it again. So it'll basically be like a ping pong board state where you go a raid or two, you deal a few damage, they rebound their board, and then you go in with your removal and pressure to rebound back and then do more damage. And each time they're going to be losing a little bit and a little bit of more resources, so that eventually you'll just clean sweep them once, I guess, your Nanami hits overtime.
Right. Now, what's one mistake that players make when trying to pilot Sukuna for the first time?
A mistake I do see a lot of people make is not managing their raid targets. And I do think that is still a core problem of the deck, being that there's really not enough names as of now, and a lot of players generally just keep at the pressure regardless if they can sustain in the next 2 to 3 turns. They just want to get the damage out, but a lot of the time you're going to have to sacrifice pressure tools in order to just play something in the backline and wait, just in case they rebound and you need to rebound back.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for all of that. Now, let's move over to the specific matchup. Izarzin, what role do you want Sinon to play against Sukuna? Are you trying to out control or just snipe key threats?
Yeah, there is an aspect of control, obviously, with a snipe, but you're not trying to expend your resources early for just like just for tempo. You're usually wanting to wait with like your special or like the raid on when they're able to get out the Sukuna, because that's the most threatening card for against this deck, because it can go up to 5k and it can get impact 1, and you're in a situation where 5k, usually you're wanting to get the effective block with your 7 cost Kirito, but since it's 5k you can't really do that. So yeah, I think it's mainly you're trying to stave off as much early chip damage as possible, and then you're trying to snipe like the threats like Sukuna, and make everything basically just bigger, like 5k, and just keep going in.
Okay, now the other side of that, Hyperactive, against Sinon's long range control style, do you feel like Sukuna should pressure early or wait for that value exchange that you just hyped up in the preliminary basics of the deck?
Against this deck, it is a bit of a losing matchup if they get their game plan early. So what you want to do as Sukuna is, while you still want to do the tempo game plan, realistically speaking, you want to be playing more stuff proactively than you would usually do. So instead of playing only the Sukunas and maybe a few chumpers in the front, you would want to play your main priority in this matchup. You would want to play your Nanamis because your Sukunas aren't actually going to do much, especially against a deck with Snipe. At most, they're going to do 1 to 2 hits before immediately dying, so your Nanamis will give you more value. And if you only have Nanamis early game, that could be really hard for them because they don't have any good snipe targets.
Mm. So, are there any key cards in the Sukuna deck that you think swing the matchup or directly punish the Sinon's pacings itself? A card that you're like, all right, if I can get this online, I'm much more likely to start winning.
I would say it is Nanami by a mile
Mm.
because if you have Nanami early and you don't commit to anything and you just keep stacking smaller bodies for a big push, they don't have a good snipe target. And they will not get a good snipe target until you commit. But they need to play things more than you need to play things. So eventually, they're going to force their hand into going for a snipe. Then you can start switching tempo, going for your full on raids. But in order to do that, you need Nanami. He is the best card in this matchup because he enables the removal spell and he is the best blocker.
Mm. So, Izarzin, which Sukuna cards demand an immediate answer for Sinon? And which ones can you afford to just leave on the board that maybe a lot of other decks can't just passively ignore?
Yeah, in terms of priority, it is obviously the raid Sukuna, but it's also the fact that, like he said, the Nanami, especially the raid, the fact that you can rest something when it gets sidelined, means that if I am not having any snipes, then I'm not able to do an effective call it, like attacking priority. So usually I want to attack with everything else first, so that they're forced to block at least one of those things, so that eventually my Kirito gets, damaged too. And since it gets damaged too, it gives that added pressure of, kind of like the Lancelot, which is like you either take one or you take two, and usually, at the end of the game when you're at 3 or 4 health, you're usually trying to, only take one, so you're forced to block.
All right. Now, for Sinon, or sorry, for you, Hyperactive, if Sinon establishes board control early, how are you looking to flip the game back into your favor? Assume they get their early 4Ks on the front line, not really sniping yet, but just getting that early control. How do you want to flip that pacing?
How you would really want to flip it is you want to, again, you would really want to play ideally one Nanami and one UG raid at least. If you have a UG raid, it'll be way better than just a Nanami raid because all of their cards before they're permabuffed, they're all removable. All of them, I think, except for maybe one or two that are fives, but most of their pressure tools will go immediately. And if they used their on play snipes early for something like Anatomy, if they didn't have any other plays, then you could safely play your Sukunas and get free damage in and force them to rebound.
Okay, now on the other end of all of this is Arzin. Do you rely more on consistent pressure or precise removal to be able to squeak out the win in this matchup?
Yeah, I think it's consistent pressure, especially like he says, I'm not trying to play my hand out in terms of like my 6 cost raid. Obviously, I want to have my 7 cost raid out, but it might be an option for removal early with like collapse if they have that. So usually, I don't want to play it in like the first 3 to 4 turns. Usually, want to wait to see if I can force their hand with my other 4Ks like my Yuki or the 4 cost Kirito instead, and those actually give me, they let me dig deeper into the deck, so usually want to see those for the consistent you know damage.
Okay, and now for the final question. What was your percentage to win the matchup before playing it, and what is your percentage of winning the matchup after playing it for each of you? Where do you think that the matchup generally stood, and now where do you think it stands?
Before the matchup, I believed it would be a 50-50 on my, well, I guess it doesn't really matter on whose part it would be. But the reasoning that I had before was that GGO doesn't particularly have the consistency tools that I do, even though their game plan, if they establish it first, will beat mine. But afterwards, I think that the matchup is now a 60-40 in favor of GGO. Mostly because the snipes, you really need nonamies. And with the main problem of the deck being not enough raid targets, they have so many good snipe targets. If you overcommit, they have so many good snipe targets, and they will just whittle you down till eventually you have really no good pressure left.
And where were you sitting on all of this, Izarzin?
No, I think I agree with him. It might just be this perspective of this, the Blue Sukuna has been like a top tier deck for a while. So I always want to give it that respect. So I would say like 50-50. And honestly, coming into the SAO meta, I didn't think that green would be so relevant. But it seems like with the advent of, OPM and then certain sets that, Japan probably didn't get at the time when SAO came out, it has made the meta like more like control based sometimes, and that also, with that one extreme, it also creates another extreme, which is rush decks. So yeah.
All right. So that's all that we have for this part. Stay tuned for the next part where we go over Shikigamis versus Sinon. Very interesting matchup. Hello, welcome back. Part 2. Now we're going over Shikigamis versus Green Sinon. And watching these matches, it was honestly very entertaining for me. Very back and forth, very fun. But first, let's get an idea of what Shikigamis is as a deck. So, Hyperactive Shikigami decks have a unique rhythm. How would you describe their overall game plan in a competitive setting?
The game plan I would describe with the phrase, you can't block everything, being that this deck has 5 attacks a turn. Some of them are damage too, but ideally you want to get 1 point of damage every single turn. If you aren't, you're losing tempo. If you are, you're slowly bringing them to the back end because with the core phrase is you can't block everything, and especially with Garden, the buffs, it's gonna be a huge pressure swing. This deck loves the early games. This deck loves the really fast-paced matchups, and this deck really, really, really likes it when the opponent has a slightly inoptimal setup. A lot of decks don't care if the opponent's setup is slightly less than usual because most of the time the enemy won't capitalize on maybe a bad turn in the first 5 turns of the game. But if they have a slow turn against Shikigami, what you can immediately do is just go into punch mode and then have, I guess, 5 attacks and then they're on the back foot.
So, what's your usual first few turns look like when things are going well? Are you setting up combos, building your board, or trying to put up a stall?
This deck, I would say the first few turns are going to be relatively similar if it goes well. Being that turn one, going first, you want a Megami name. Turn If you're going second, you would want a Megami name and either a Shikigami name or something that could give you an additional energy or additional pressure, like a Sumiki zero cost or a Yuji zero cost. Turn two, generally you want to be able to either get a Toge, two more Shikigami names, or if you're going second, ideally you want the 3 cost Searcher because that is it's a 2 gen, really important for the deck. And then turn three is essentially turn three or turn two, depending on if you're going first or second, is when you want to start doing up to 2 damage a turn. Turn two is ideally where you want to do it, especially if you're going second. And what that looks like would be either moving stuff up from turn two, plus a 10 shadows technique to get an active body, or playing a 10 shadows and a raid, or a combination of a raid and the color trigger. generally speaking, you want at least 2 to 3 active bodies by turn 3. And you want to do about 2 damage turn 3 so that you can keep up the tempo going later.
So, which card or interactions is the backbone of this deck? Something that everything else is built around to make sure that you can steal these types of wins.
The main interaction is with the field, being Chimera Shadow Garden. And it is a very nuanced card compared to how it reads. Most of the time, what you're going to do with Garden is you're going to attack with all of your names, then attack with Megami. But against decks like Blue JJK or Blue SAO, when they have a lot of life triggers that could stop you, sometimes you want to stagger. And by staggering your attacks, what I mean is punch with Totality, then punch with Megami, immediately reset, then punch with Totality again, punch with another Megami name, reset, or you want to immediately go as soon as you can. If you have one garden, punch with one, immediately go with Megami, restand. Because a lot of these decks, what they can do to stop your core interaction is any special trigger and a few of the color triggers will just immediately stop your push completely. So you want to make note of, while you do want the garden trigger as often as possible, sometimes you don't want it, I guess, as a finisher. Sometimes you just want it as assurance.
Hey, so what role do you like Shikigamis to take against most decks? Outvalue, control, or overwhelm?
Against most decks, your game plan is just going to be overwhelming with pressure, especially now since there are a lot of green decks rising. You really want that early pressure because green pretty weak in the early game, and the mid game is where you will most likely win or lose by turn 7, basically at the latest. And it's it's fine what the matchup is for Shikigami right now against the meta spread, but if you can't put up pressure, you're gonna get stomped this meta.
Alrighty, well, I think that'll cover all of those questions. Now let's get into the specific matchup itself. So, Izarzin, how does your strategy shift when facing Shikigamis instead of Sukuna? Are you playing more defensively or are you hunting specific targets more?
I think there's two key strategies when I'm playing against Shikigamis.
Hmm.
The first strategy is being aware of if they're going to push up early, if they have that sort of hand, or if they're going to establish a Megumi raid early so that they have more bodies in me. And that basically means if I have the, ample amount of 0 and 1 cost, sometimes maybe I want to play that 1 cost up front, the 2500, so that I'm able to block, maybe one of those 0 costs that are 2k. And then the next strategy is honestly trying to get, really strong pressure and effective blocking with the 7 cost Kirito. Because specifically with decks that don't have specials that are able to clear a body, from hand, you're able to try to establish that as fast as possible, get into a situation where you have enough snipes and then get damage too, and they're forced to block with certain things. So yeah, I would say those are the two strategies that I'm looking to go towards when I'm playing against Shikigami.
All right, and then for you, Hyperactive, what role does Shikigami take in this matchup? Are you trying to stabilize and outlast Sinon or race to overwhelm?
The game plan that this deck will have against everything will never be to outlast, because by the nature of the fact this deck has no removal, you're gonna get stomped late game. So you are going to just want to overpressure basically everything. And while it is easier against a deck like Sinon, being that it is more of a ramp deck, it's still a little bit awkward because of Snipe.
All right. So, are there any Shikigami setups that feel particularly dangerous or difficult to break apart as Arzin?
I think the trade off of not having a special that can remove also means that when I am sniping, I do have to be aware that the number one priority is the Megumi raid, but if he doesn't have that, usually it'll be the totality, the one that can get damage too. But there's also the fact that his special does bring it back, and then there's other things that are able to, enable that body to come back. So you're in a situation where, yes, snipe is good, but at the same time, you're not really advancing the game because you're not really taking any life. You're just kind of trying to control the board.
And for you, Hyperactive, are there any summoning patterns or board setups that make Sinon's removal less effective? Is there a way for you to play around all their snipe that is constantly happening in order to still apply that pressure and squeak out some wins?
Yes, there are a few lines. One of the better lines in this deck is you are going to go color trigger Megami plus raid Megami on top of that color trigger. That'll give you 3 bodies. One you can't use this turn, but it'll give you a lot of pressure and something you can do to save your resources, especially against Sinon if they have snipe. If you don't have the raid Megami, then I would keep at least one revive in hand, being the color trigger or the special. I would keep one of those, and I would prioritize pushing things up over, I guess, setting up your 2 AP plays. Because most of the time, their snipes are going to be for that turn only. So if they use a snipe, you use a revive. If they use 2 snipes, you want to use 2 revives. You just want to make it so that their removal only ever trades 1 for 1 and not 1 plus 1, or I guess 1 for 2, one in hand, being that you bring back the thing they just sniped.
Okay. And for you, Izarzin, does Sinon ever become the beatdown in this matchup? And if so, how do you identify when you have switched that gear?
Mm. Um, I think it's mainly when I'm in a situation where instead of establishing uh, a raid, I don't see that 7 cost Kirito, then I'm basically just trying to get, my 4 cost out, which are usually the Yuki or the Kirito, or even some of my 3 costs, which are 2 energy. If I'm not seeing that Kirito, I don't really need that many. And honestly, in this specific deck list, I only have one, but Buggy is very useful to just bring those 2 energy generators up without sacrificing your later turns. So yeah, I'm basically just going for beatdown when I'm in a situation where it's not effective to have everything in the back. I want to have as many blocks as possible because I know that he'll be able to at least go for like 5 attacks, in a usual turn. So I need to at least set up 4 blockers.
Okay. And for you, Hyperactive, do you feel since Sinon is being ranked as one of the tier 1 decks now, I did not personally make that list. That was somebody else. Do you feel since they are now ranking in tier 1 that Shikigami's has enough grind through tools to be able to compete in more competitive settings, being that it is an aggro deck into these larger green control decks?
I think Shikigami is in a better state than it was last format, but I don't think it'll be a consistent enough game plan into a deck like GGO or Gios to really warrant playing it at a larger event. If you know what you're doing, sure, and if you know what the scene is generally, what the matchup spread will be, then yes, I would recommend it if you are aiming to beat these green decks. Because a lot of the green decks, like Green OPM, Kurapika, Lancelot, they will be blitzed. Like blitzed with a capital B. They will not be able to keep up with you, and you'll get a lot of free wins just because of the matchup alone.
Okay. Now, speaking of knowing thine meta, let's go over percentages. Going into this, where did we think that Sinon would perform against Shikigami's? And after playing the 3 matches, where do you think it has settled in the matchup? Win percentage, loss percentage.
I would say going into the match, I had the idea of a 60-40 in my favor because of my rushdown tools. And after playing the match, I would say it is closer to maybe a 55-45 because of the possibility of them just getting the Kirito raid early. And that, while you can still win through with enough pressure, it is certainly a lot harder than it would be if they just simply opened it too late.
Okay. And how about where you stand, Izarzin?
Um, honestly, I agree. I in terms of TCG archetypes, they're in the opposite spectrums. One is trying to rush down, and the other's trying to ramp up. So yeah, I think philosophically, the Megumi should have the favorable matchup most of the time, and 55-45 sounds pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's going to be everything from it. Fun matches in JJK versus SAO. I have to say, I was not anticipating this match to be as close as it was, in all honesty. But I'm very glad that it is. I mean, showing a lot of diversity in the format, and it's good to see SAO is shaking up the meta, not just by putting itself high up on the list, but by bringing other decks forward into it based off of their winning against SAO decks. But that'll be everything in the video. Thank you both very much. Be sure to follow Big Beard Pirates TCG on YouTube and on Twitch. Are you guys on Twitch?
Mainly YouTube, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure you follow them over there on YouTube. And don't forget to follow me as well. And we'll see you all in the future. Goodbye.